Welcome to this installment, this episode of the Practice Sleuths. Adina and I get together every now and again and we talk about either a topic or maybe a few examples from the repertoire, um, which we explore a little bit, practice related issues. So I'm going to hand you over to Adina, who's going to introduce you to the topic that we're going to look at right now.
So, as the practice sleuths, today we decided that we're going to take a closer look at fast versus slow practice. Fast and slow practice, fast um, plus minus slow practice, the benefits and the let's say deficits would be the wrong word, but what can we gain from both of them? And how can we get away from what we've been taught from the very beginning? I would say almost all of us, which is slow practice is what you always have to do at the beginning. Fast practice is reserved for when you know all the notes. These are some of the things we'll be discussing. We'll be myth busting again. That's the whole point. And we'll start with an example that Graham has brought. I'm all ears.
Yes. Thank you, Adina. Yes, well, I've chosen first to look at the finale of the B flat minor sonata of Chopin, which is infamous in the repertoire amongst pianists because it's very fast. Both hands are playing together, triplets, and it would be actually even faster in the end, but I'm not prepared to sit and do that now. Too fast, and I'd want a little bit of pedal as well. So I would strongly suggest that when we're starting off working on a piece that goes this speed, that we would probably want to not jump in at the eventual tempo, and that we would start off aiming for comfort, security, I guess, some sort of enjoyment of the sensations involved. However, I think there's the shadow side to much of what we do at the piano. The more I practice this slowly, the stronger the reflexes for slowness are sort of entrenched into my system. So we've got to be careful not to practice slowly for too long before we start increasing the speed. Now I've got several ideas for increasing the speed, which I can share with you. I mean, I could be here for hours sharing with you how I would do it, but I think what I would recommend is a certain, like a primer coat, an undercoat of slow practice, and very soon with a fast piece, we would want to start doing the fast practice. The way I like to do it is something I call chaining. I don't think it's just me who calls it that. My teacher used to call it little bits fast. It could just be starting off with, let me do it slowly so you can hear it. That sort of pattern. See, the benefits of doing it slowly are that I can hear shapes. I can create shapes. I can really hear that both hands are together, sounding together. But I'm forming reflexes that I'm not going to be using in the end. So I need to very quickly get on to maybe just the first two notes. And then three notes. Adding. Now I've got a beat, a half a bar. I could then work on the next little chain. So maybe I have a half a bar, little group. Then I do another half a bar, little group. Then I can join those two little groups together and form a bigger group. Now I was starting from the first note of a group, but I could start on the second note. I could start on the third note. I mean, there's much more that I want to share with you for this, but maybe I could pass you over to Adina now, who can
Right,
further.
it's just urged. I've got the urge to say something. Yes. Um, let's go back to what you say. When I start slowly, what I'm doing is I'm having a chance to, you were saying, listen to different things. I mean, have a chance to not just superficially look at the notes, but to look much more closely. And of course, I'm determining these very first things. I'm looking for phrasing. I'm of course setting fingerings. I'm looking at how the hands interact with one another. And the more we practice slowly, the better we have that feeling that the foundation of the piece is being cemented. That part is good, but we're also suggesting to our brain that we can see, hear, and control what we're doing. And this is a really good piece for that. There's no possible way that we can control the every single note that we're playing, which is why the chaining is such a successful method, because we're going to be able to, let me use the word that Ruth Schoenthal used to use very often, gesture. We're practicing a gesture. And you're breaking up, of course, and creating new gestures in that you're not starting with the same note. But if we practice too often slow, we're saying to ourselves, and this becomes our security blanket in concert, I can see, hear, and control everything I'm doing, right? And then we get to fast tempo, and I'm sure you've seen beginners or even professionals who are faced with a very, very complicated virtuosic score, that they start to get in panic mode. Is, oh my God, I can't control what I'm doing. I'm reminded of a first lesson with an adult student who's trying to play something polyphonic for the first time. This loss of control, which is necessary to be able to play a piece in that final speed, is something that we're undermining, this feeling of, yes, I can trust myself, if we practice too long in a slow tempo. Now, let me add one more thought, and that is the other thing about practicing in a slow tempo is that because I can make sure I'm playing all the right notes, I'm accustoming myself to the fact that I can also hear all the right and wrong notes. Whereas if I start from the very beginning, going back and forth, sort of a seesaw between a very slow tempo and, as you showed, a quick tempo, I get used to the motion, to the gesture, and to the feeling of it's the entire sound I'm creating. And if something in between, I'm not actually being able to check for it, I start to trust that the note is there.
Yes, yes. I mean, there's so much there that we seem to be agreeing on. The shadow side of slow practice, too much slow practice is that we don't form reflexes for the speed, and too much fast practice can lead to sloppiness. It's interesting with colleagues. There's so many concert pianists who I know personally who swear by their slow practice. They will constantly be doing their slow practice right up to the day of a concert almost, as a way of just keeping that feeling of control. I mean, I like to, I hadn't planned to do this, but if I go somewhere else in this sonata, someplace where, okay, so for example, I'm now in the first movement in bar 73. If I were to practice this slowly, I would want to make sure that every detail there, balance, tonal balance, pedaling. So for example, what I'm getting here, what I'm aiming to get is a lovely ringing top finger in my right hand, pinky finger, plus the bass line, the bass note. So the first note of each group, I would want to have a little bit more support from, and the middle of the underneath right hand and the upper left hand to be lighter and softer. Now I can exaggerate that at a slow tempo and really feel everything. Whoops, let me do that better. And I'm getting the sound that I want. It's not just the control, it's the sound that perhaps at the full speed I wouldn't be able to compute all of that at once.
Well, everything you're saying has absolute is invaluable for learning a piece. What we want to make sure that what we're doing is enjoy what slow practice is good for, and be aware of what slow practice can be doing at the same time.
Yes.
And one thing, for example, that you just demonstrated is reading the score is something you can do in a slow tempo. When we get to a faster tempo, we're not actually reading the individual notes. I'd asked you, we've got this first word example. Graham, if you wouldn't mind showing that one example of the four words I've got on the
Yes.
screen.
So let
Right.
me just make sure. Yeah, okay. I have to share the right image. Let me just do that.
Yeah, it's just a quick example. I just right. So everybody watching this, I'm sure that you can read this. So what's going on here is your eyes are taking in the shape of the word, the first letter, which is really important, which is the same thing when we look at the score. We're catching the overall picture of a phrase, the we're catching the first note, we know in which octave we are, and the details that come after that are just being suggested to our brain. It's a reminder to pull that up from memory. When we're playing a piece, the minute we start going even in a slow tempo a little bit faster than the speed we need to be able to decipher every single note, just as we're not reading the word you by going Y-O-U, or in this case Y-U-O, same thing with our score. So yes, of course it's important when we teach somebody how to read English. We will start with letters, but here with the piece, we start with the individual notes, then we go to the phrases, and then what we're trying to do here by moving from slow practice to faster practice, and we're going to talk about the jump to actual fast practice, is we are planting the information we need to be able to go from let's say, a more top-down overarching view of what we're playing and make sure that that motor pattern is elicited. Thanks, Graham. You can.
No, brilliant, brilliant. Yeah, so going back to that finale of the Chopin, the shadow side or the downside of the slow practice. Okay, let's start with the plus side. So I'm hearing every single note, I'm feeling every single motion that I need to do, but it's like looking down at my footsteps. I'm not looking at where I'm going. I'm feeling notes rather than gestures. So maybe I could just quickly look at sort of a tried and tested way of practicing, which is probably kind of universal, which is this thing of practicing in different rhythms, which is a way supposedly of grouping. Well, if I do a dotted rhythm, I'm grouping in units of 2. Whoops. And then I can control what happens when I land on the long note. I can switch off, make sure I'm balanced on that finger, balance there, and I'm lightning fast, but just pairs. Then I invert that, so I can consciously control and command my muscles to work in units. So that's units of 2. What about units of 3? So there's nothing mechanical about the way I'm doing that, because I'm really concentrating on 2 things. One is on the long note, making sure that there's no tension in my body. On the quick notes, playing them as fast and as light as possible to get to the next long note. And if I keep changing where that long note is, I don't form habits of, getting used to stopping always on the same note. I'm constantly changing. This is an objection I hear sometimes about rhythm practice is, it's mechanical. Yes, it's mechanical if you do it mechanically. The sort of thing where you're sitting there with a metronome, not thinking about anything, just mechanically doing. That's the danger. That's the drawback of rhythm practice. But rhythm practice can be very helpful. I think doing something like, I've got a group of 6. Maybe I do 4 notes fast and 2 notes slowly. Then I shift where those slow notes go. And the slow notes could be firm and the fast notes could be light. I could go on for a long time, but I'm not going to, because I can see you probably.
You can see me gasping for air because I want to get in here. Basically, what you're doing is you're breaking up this dichotomy that we set up as the theme for today. In a way, bear with me, we talked about fast versus slow. What you're doing here is you're sneaking in fast practice in what feels like a slow tempo. So even the first pairs you had, you're making 2s too fast, and then you've got slow to get to the next one. And of course, when you have 3. So here we're already doing fast practice through the dotted rhythms or through the change of rhythms. And we're already we're not going F, and make sure I'm speaking English, F, G, B flat, D flat, E. Nobody can ever think in that speed. And in the moment we start doing 2s, we're already allowing the motion to be automatized. So we're we're getting away from the reading of the individual note, and we're sneaking in some fast practice with a good balance of being able to hear whether we're playing right or not. So
Absolutely. Yes.
I absolutely agree with you too, to double down on absolutely, and that is that by speeding up in the middle of a slow practice, we're increasing concentration and we're also training for what's happening next. Now, the it's not only about reading the notes and finding the notes, we're also blocking positions as you basically we've got four notes that are together. And so whether we're chaining or the chaining examples you brought at the beginning where you're breaking up the way the score is written and we're sort of bridging from one gesture to the next, which is also allowing us to build up speed that we will need later. I'm reminded of a story once. I had a flautist who came and said that she had gone to her professor and she had been having trouble, I think it was Messiaen, with an unbelievable chromatic scale on the flute, and she asked her professor how he did it, and he played it for her. Right? There's a lot of mystery involved. He had no way to explain it. He just played it for her, and
Right.
I used to scoff at that and think this is ridiculous, and how poor an instructor that was, until I discovered something. This is my chance, of course, to bring out my trick here. So we're going to use the ball to look at something, and that is there's something that most pianists, most musicians don't know about that sports people talk about all the time, and that is there's a difference between slow and controlled movements and fast, they call them ballistic movements. And the reason I've got this ball is it would be very obvious to you, maybe not when you're thinking in a piano context, but if you're thinking in a sports context, if I want to practice throwing this ball, slow practice isn't going to do me any good. In order to throw the ball, I really have to have completely different set of muscles. And you saw as my motion, it's going all the way back down my back to make this quick movement. Well, we can't see inside the pianist's hands, but the same things are happening. When we do quick movements, we don't have a chance to use all of those small fine muscles that we're
Mhm.
tuning when we play it in slow practice. So we have to make sure that we're not only training fast because the piece calls for it, but these are a different set of muscles, or actually it's a different way in which the muscles interact with one another. And I would just like to share with everybody the complexity without getting you scared about, oh my God, I'm doing these things and I never knew about it. Ballistics, I'm going to give you the definition: muscle contractions that exhibit maximum velocities and accelerations over a short period of time. So whether I'm throwing a ball or I'm throwing a punch or I'm doing a basketball shot or I'm playing something, we talked about the pathétique, the spurts of energy, these are ballistic movements.
Mhm.
And as everybody knows, you could, I mean, and I don't even, if you were always just practicing, you could be very sure that you're going to play right notes, but you'll never get the impulse you need. You won't be practicing that incredible burst. Whether it's in piano, I played it a little bit louder, but that it actually comes. But you've got this sudden spurt of energy, and that causes muscles to work in ways that they don't work when you're working on slow practice.
Totally, because when you think about it, nobody learned to run by doing a lot of walking, except that you have to learn to walk first before you can run. What you're saying is would be very different at the tempo. So yeah, and this is something that actually my last teacher Nina Svetlanova would talk about. Um, Very much, she'd say a fast piece. It doesn't matter how much slow practice you do on a fast piece, it's not going to help to get it faster. You're going to have to at some point train for that speed. And she was very insistent that actually it can be quite uncomfortable. Now, she doesn't mean physically uncomfortable. She didn't mean that. She didn't mean it hurt or anything, but uncomfortable as mentally, because often it's going to take two or three or maybe more practice sessions before we can start to feel the fruits of our practice. And I find what a lot of people do is they may do a little bit of this chaining practice or little bits fast, and then because it doesn't, they don't feel really in control, and they want to feel in control. So they end their practice session by going over it slowly again, because it gives them a chance to feel the control. She was so against that. She would tell us that when we're forming the reflexes for speed, don't practice slowly for a while. After you have got those reflexes, then she said slow practice every now and again is very useful. So I thought I'd throw that in there as well.
Absolutely. And if we go back to these principles of ballistic movements, force, velocity, and power, it's evident even from the words themselves. You cannot practice force, speed, and power
Mm.
in a slow tempo.
Mm.
These are just dichotomies. And um, so force, even force in a slow chord. I mean, we were here, so let me go back to this C minor chord. Of course, I can go slowly, but the minute, help me, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel that it's a slow motion, but the hitting of the notes is actually to get the sound I want, is
Yeah,
actually a quick motion,
fast.
right?
Yes, it has to be.
Right.
Otherwise, the keys wouldn't speak loudly.
So I would like to introduce the idea of slow practice is the tempo at which I can read, control, listen to, and correct everything. And the minute I get into faster practice, I'm working with velocity, power, speed, and I'm also working with listening to the holistic sound of what I'm producing. I'm looking at a bigger picture. I'm talking about gestures or phrases, and these are so important to store the piece in memory and to store the piece in motor memory. So not only in my cognitive memory.
Yes, this is all great. I mean, I'm just now thinking about one other thing. Maybe I'll just do one last thing with that B flat minor Chopin
Sure.
finale, which is slow tempo but with fast reflexes, fast motions. So I sometimes do this. If I sometimes try. Let me see if I can do it. I'm blocking the keys, and I'm only one note is only going to sound. I'm going to play the first group of notes at fast speed. So I discover that is the length. That's the time that the key stays down before it comes up. That long. So I could play each note extremely quickly, but the tempo is slow. You can see that I'm getting ready for the next note really fast, which brings me to my next example, unless you have
Okay,
anything.
wait 1 second. Just for this, I
Yeah,
just
yeah.
wanted to point out that you also could play, which I'm sure you've done, right? The blocking
Oh, yes, yes. Blocks.
blocks. And here
Yeah,
again, the difference between a block and the arpeggio that we're doing, of course, is just the individual sounds, but we need all of those in our hand to play fast. So
yes,
I would argue again, a way to,
yes, exactly. Exactly
and
that.
the idea is to have fun with that sound because you're not going to be saying, ah, it was slightly faster the second time. You're just letting the fingers go, trusting yourself, learning to trust yourself, and learning to trust yourself at a high speed that you can't really look in and see what is every individual finger doing.
Exactly. Exactly. And I love what you say about having fun, because I think a lot of times people practice and there's a sort of dreariness associated with practice. People just want to play. But practicing, I think, it should be fun in itself. Can be fun if we play imaginative, do it imaginatively. But maybe I could just go on to my next example, which is the Rondo Capriccioso of Mendelssohn. So this is again a kind of a hybrid between fast and slow. That's probably the tempo you'd go with. But let me practice it slowly. I'm hoping everybody can see my keyboard. Let me just tilt my screen down a bit. I'm going to play at a slow tempo but with very fast motions. Can you see how quickly I'm getting from one position to the next? So that's helpful because there's no point doing that at a slow tempo with slow movements. Sluggish movements like that's not going to do any good at all. But that's helpful. And then, of course, pretty soon afterwards, I could start to chain that by the beat or by the note. Maybe just that much. and I could add a bit more, and then just add a little bit more. What I think is important with that, very important with that, is before I would repeat that snippet, just to decide why is it that I'm repeating it? What exactly was it that didn't come up to standard? Was it that there was a little bit of tension in my forearm as I was moving? Was it that my left hand was too loud for the right? Whatever it may be, I'm aware of that before I repeat, so that when I repeat, I've got something very tangible to do on the repetition to improve, which means there's going to be silence between each of those repetitions.
I have a surprise attack for you, Graham. Would you mind doing the same? Da-da-dum bump, and close your eyes. It's about the left hand jump,
Yes, I've got that. Yes, I can feel that. I did.
right?
Yeah.
Again, that's a ballistic movement.
Yes.
And I want to point out to everybody watching, Graham did not need eyes for that. This is another thing to add. When I practice slowly, my eyes are taking in everything I'm doing. When I'm performing, I may be looking at the conductor. I may be looking, if it's a concerto, I may be looking at this score if I have it. I may be looking out into space if I want to make sure that I don't look at the audience. There are all kinds of ways my eyes can be. But what often happens is that if I get that feeling of I've got to control, I'm going to suddenly look down at my hand and I'm going to interfere, as you were mentioning. I'm suddenly the centipede who's stumbling over the 98th foot or something, right?
Yeah.
So another thing about fast practice and ballistic movements is to gain trust in yourself. We spend so many hours in front of the instrument that it's amazing how much we actually could do in the dark, right?
Yeah.
And to include this in the fast practice and to understand that these jumps are something that we're trying to secure so that we have the feeling no matter what happens on stage, we can play. I have um, so much to say about this, but I just wanted to add one more thing about fast practice. One thing would be that we've been discussing is playing fast practice as in already playing it, as Nina was telling you, already playing it in the final tempo. Well, let me be the disturbance in this hundreds of years practice and say we also need to practice it faster than the final tempo.
Yeah. Yeah.
And why am I saying this? Because the science of this is that when we're on stage, our heart is beating about 10% faster than normal. So our sense of timing is 10% faster of normal. And I don't think there's anyone out there who's ever played the piano in performance who hasn't experienced that on stage you start a piece and you go, oh my, in your head you're going, oh my goodness, this is much faster than I intended to play. So I actually had a wonderful organist tell me about this experience that she noticed that she had started some very complex Bach piece on the organ and discovered she was way too fast, and she just said, "Okay, I'm going to relax. I'm just going to keep up in that speed." So instead of trying to figure out how she could slow down, she actually managed to play it in that 10% faster speed. Now, I'm not recommending that for anybody else. She got a fantastic grade on that performance, which was her final exam. But let's go back for a second. Why am I suggesting that we practice faster than the final speed? Not only to make sure that when we're on stage we don't suddenly get stuck in a tempo we can't execute. It's also so that the fast tempo, when I go back to it, will feel slow or it'll
Yes.
feel comfortable. And I know I have that extra little, it's like having a tank of gas in the back of the car just to make sure, right? We have that extra tank of gas that we can fill in if necessary because we know we can play it faster. People will argue, teachers out there listening will argue, oh my goodness, the last thing I want is my students practicing faster than they can play, or I don't want students practicing and making mistakes. And if we haven't already said this, let's say that again. A mistake is not permanent. A mistake is not fatal. A mistake, when you're going from slow and fast practice and actually juggling back and forth as if you were switching back and forth on the slow fast meter, is about experimentation. It's about having fun. It's about testing your limits. And it's about understanding the phenomena that happen when we perform.
Yes, totally. I mean, I sometimes get people come for a lesson and they'll say, "Oh, I can't get it quite as fast as," and then they'll mention a famous pianist who's recording, or usually a live performance that they particularly admire, and I'll say you've got to remember that that person at that moment has adrenaline pulse pumping through their body, and it's going to be easier for them to play fast. They can. You're not. You don't have that at the moment. You're just sitting chilled. But wait until you get a bit of adrenaline going through, and you'll find that you're faster. You can play faster than you thought. Which happened to me with the very first time I played the third Beethoven concerto. Which, funny you should mention it, because that's where I was going to take an example. I thought I had taken the last movement at my normal tempo, and afterwards my teacher said, "Wow, that last movement was extra fast." And I thought, really, was it? And I listened back to the recording afterwards, and sure enough, it was a crazy speed, but it felt to me like my normal speed when I was on the stage.
Absolutely. So, do you have something you wanted to mention about this as a
Yes,
last example?
yes. I was thinking about, we tend to think of practicing fast music slowly, but do we ever think about practicing slow music fast? Um, and there was a time when I was learning this piece as a student, I can remember it really well, that the slow movement got worse over time rather than better. And I figured out eventually what it was. Let me play a little bit of the slow. It's kind of slow, 3 beats in a bar officially, but we would probably want to subdivide them. And there's a certain amount of liberty, timing. So we'd take a little time there. And I was aware after a while that I had completely lost the pulse in all the little moments that I was taking. I'd lost the bigger sense of the pulse because there was so much time between one event and the next. So I decided to, draw the moustache on the Mona Lisa by practicing it at a much faster tempo, which of course makes it sound dreadful. But let me try it. 1, 2, 3. And I could, if I wanted to, maybe take away some of the surface detail. Rather than get lost in, I could just remove some of those notes. I mean, going on to the, which bar? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Seventh bar. I could just simplify that. Before adding the surface detail, and then slow it down to the tempo. And suddenly, literally suddenly, almost after one practice session, I was able to feel, yes, now I've reclaimed that sense of pulse. A little bit like getting a kind of a bird's eye view of it. So sometimes working that way, taking a slow piece and just deliberately playing it faster. Yes, we're going to lose the beauty. We're not going to get the music, but we're going to get some benefits from that.
Actually, I think what you're doing by playing it faster, and I didn't even consider that fast. I would suggest playing it as if it were a completely different piece. No
Hmm.
pedal, even faster, and maybe even more of a tenuto or staccato, just to, um, would you mind trying it? I mean,
No, let me see. You mean play that staccato? Two.
but
That feels
so
naughty.
it feels naughty, but that's what we want. We're creating friction within ourselves and saying, okay, but that's not how I want to interpret it. But
Mm.
we're doing something for the brain. We're helping it to understand how this piece is built and why it wouldn't be that way. I often had this, I don't know if you've experienced this too, Graham, probably. If you have a student who's worked really hard, they bring the piece to the lesson, and there's a note in there that's just glaringly wrong to our ears because we've studied the score,
Mm.
right? but they found it right. And instead of just pointing out the wrong and circling it, and my first piano teacher he had a whole set of colored pencils. So first it was pencil, then it was like green, then it was orange, and then it was red. And he was like marking the notes that you got wrong. And he wasn't asking the question of why is my brain firing that I'm playing that note wrong? And by practicing the way that you just did, it's also a way of discovering that the way the composer did it was right. There's something right about it. You're finding out more about how your body reacts to a note, even if you play a wrong note that's out of place, or you play a rhythm that doesn't make sense, makes no sense, or you're saying, okay, this tempo doesn't work for me. You're also building memory networks that are reinforcing the accuracy of what you want to be doing.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So in homeopathic doses, neither of us is recommending that somebody always practices fast, the fast passage is slow or the slow passage is fast, but we're saying it's time to break it up, which makes, we talked about experimentation and creativity and practice and interest. And of course, it helps us keep our focus when we're working.
Absolutely. You've got another image I think you wanted to share, didn't you?
Well, what we're doing too is, and your example, which I don't have the score here, so I can't show you, but it's also that when you're looking at the score, you're looking at, let's go back for a second just because I happen to have it open. Let's go back to the Beethoven, to the Pathetique. If I'm looking at the first, when I'm reading them, and even now, I'm not reading the actual notes, I'm reading the first gesture. And when we practice that in an even faster tempo, what we're doing is we're checking to see, and now if you wouldn't mind showing the second picture that I
Yes, let me
gave you,
see if I can
we're checking
find
to
that.
see whether our cognitive image is involved in a distortion of some kind, or whether we're actually seeing what we want to be seeing. And many of you know this, the so-called Stroop test or the Stroop effect. Maybe you've seen this. It's absolutely no problem for anyone to read the first lines: blue, yellow, red, purple, black. I can do that in top speed. Graham, do you mind if I use you as my laboratory animal? Would you mind reading the bottom line?
Purple black?
The one, though after the blue, yellow, red, purple, black, would you mind reading the second set of colors?
Uh, Blue, yellow, red, purple, black. It took me a little longer.
Right. Okay. And now try to read the colors.
Oh, yellow, red, blue, green, purple.
So this is the cognitive distortion that we have when we haven't practiced it slowly so that we've got the information in there. Or that would be one reason that when we look at the score, we're not playing the right notes. We've either not done the detail work that we need, or we're taking in the entire picture, as in the first word there that's in yellow print, but it's the word blue. And our brain is going back and forth between, what am I focusing on? Am I focusing on color, or am I focusing on reading the word?
Yeah,
Thank you. You can release the audience of that
that's
cognitive
interesting.
dissonance.
Yes.
So when I'm learning a piece and I want to be able to perform it in full speed, I want to make sure that the individual phrases that I'm looking at are synchronous with all the things I'm going to be doing at the same time. I'm going to be listening for what it's going to sound like. I'm going to be preparing for the sound I want to create. I'm going to be controlling for the sound that I have created. I'm going to be thinking towards the next one. And the least thing I can use in that moment is some kind of difficulty looking at the score and reading the entire word. So I have to know, am I looking for the color blue, or am I looking for the word blue?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So maybe this was an extreme example, but I just wanted to point out that we're doing many things when we practice that we may not be consciously monitoring.
Mm.
And some of them are very constructive for being able to play the piece in the final tempo, and some of them can actually be undermining them. And this is getting back to my argument. If we don't go back and forth between slow and fast practice, we may be always having enough time to read the letters, but we may not be looking at the colors, or
So
vice versa.
the moral of the story, or the message, seems to be both slow and fast practice are useful, but for different reasons.
Right. And if I come to the very first question that I asked myself when we decided to meet on this topic was, why are we asking ourselves this question? We're asking this question because we're at the start of a practice session, or an interval within a unit within a practice session, and we're maybe not clear about the goal of this session. So if we focus on what do I want to achieve in these 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I wouldn't take anything bigger. We can say, is it about practicing the gesture? Then I may be going back and forth between slow and fast to make sure that the gesture or the jump that you did with closed eyes, that these things are in there. Or is it about controlling for all the little things that I may want to slow it down, and then may want to speed it up and record it and see, am I keeping all the little details even when I'm not able to say third finger is hitting E flat, right? I'm just doing it
Yeah.
because it's part of the flow. I would also like to, that's my role in our teamwork here. I like to say, okay, we need a structure for all of this. I would say there are several reasons why I would make this choice. And I would like to offer the audience, of course, we've been talking about technical issues, about how we can build up a speed, but we're also just think about how every one of us who's taught piano has had to, at some point, attack an Alberti bass or any kind of other ostinato. And it's about creating a motor pattern, whether it be a scale or just be a broken chord or arpeggio, that will be the foundation of all fast practice later. So we could be looking at technical issues, we could be looking at standard patterns that repeat throughout all of classical music, that of course many modern composers like to give us the needle because they say we're not going to have any of those in our scores. Or are we practicing endurance? And we talked about the ballistics. Are we throwing the ball in a quick speed, or are we just sort of dribbling in a very slow tempo? So we also need muscle building and endurance and comfort in the faster sections. And an argument to say, but maybe today should be slow practice, would be to avoid overuse, the musician's medicine aspect of this. We don't want to overdo the muscles in the
Mm.
arms. Maybe it's a chance actually to do slow and fast practice as mental practice.
Mhm.
And then my last 2 or 3 notes are we doing problem solving in this session? Then we will actually want to do both. We will want to see, how does it feel when I play it fast? And how does it feel when I play it slow? And what is the difference? I mean, aside from the mechanics that we just described, what am I being able to focus on in slow practice that's disappearing when I'm playing quicker? And I guess the last thing, which is actually the first and the overarching theme, is if we're working on musicality, we want to have this flexibility to be able to play the piece that we are working on in any tempo that we decide is fit. And if we're playing in a church with lots of echo, we're going to have to play even the fastest piece slower. In
Absolutely.
other words, in other words, we need to be able to go down a notch. If we're being recorded live and this is being broadcast and our heart is beating quickly and we're playing a little bit faster than usual, we want to be able to feel comfortable in that speed too. But the bottom line is we want to retain the music that the composer wrote.
Oh, absolutely. First and foremost, that. I think listening to you, Adina, just talking there, it made me realize that this is what I'm trying to do all the time in my own practice and also in my teaching, is to have a plan in the practice room. So what are we going to do? What do we want to achieve moment by moment in the practice? And of course, that, as you say, you can plan a certain amount, but you've got to be aware. Why have I taken my hands off the keyboard? Why am I putting my hands on the keyboard? What am I aiming to achieve? And I do think a lot of the problems people have with practice is they don't really know what they're doing. They end up filling in time by doing a whole load of sort of time consuming activities, such as get the metronome out and play it with the metronome, or do half an hour of some sort of mindless exercise first, because they're not aware of what practice can be. But so this is one of the things we do with the practice sleuths, and I think if you've got any ideas that you want to have us look at, put them in the comments below, and we will read them, and we will come back with more episodes of the practice sleuths based on what it is you want us to discuss. So
Well, this has
until
been delightful, Graham. Thank you so much
yes.
for your input, and I'll give you the last word.
Well, the last word is thank you, Adina, for your time and expertise, and thank you all for watching. And we'll look forward to seeing you in our next episode.